everybody. Put your hand up if you love public speaking. Okay, a few of you. And put your hand up if you don't really enjoy public speaking. A lot more of you. Okay, thank you for being so honest. Well, what we're going to look at today is how you can start to enjoy public speaking using the power of frameworks. But first, let me start with a couple of quotes. The first one is from Marie Curie. And she said, "Have no fear of perfection because you will never reach it." Now, if I ask you, how many of you here today are perfectionists? A lot, okay? Now, with certain things, like public speaking, it's practice that gets us better. So you've got to go through that messy period where you don't feel very comfortable so that you can come out the other end. Not a perfect speaker, but a better and more confident speaker. Here's another quote. This is from Coco Chanel. And it is difficult. This is all about speaking up for yourself aloud. And it can be really tough in meetings, can't it? When there's all sorts of things going on and we need to speak up, but the moment sometimes just passes us by. Here's another one. Put your hand up if you're an introvert. Yeah, I'd probably say about half of the room, maybe 2/3. This is from Susan Cain, who wrote the book Quiet. And she said there's zero correlation between being the best talker and having the best ideas. But quite often it's the loudest people who get their ideas adopted, right? Here's one more quote from someone not quite as famous as the last three, but she's working on it. And that's to experiment to your heart's content. So I always tell my clients, take every opportunity that you can to speak. And today is a safe environment, and we're going to do a couple of exercises in just a moment that will help you with speaking up. So who am I, and why am I up here on this stage? So I'm an author of the book called How to Be a Diva at Public Speaking. And diva is nothing to do with being a difficult, bitchy woman. Diva is actually derived from the word divine. And for me, diva is an acronym which stands for all the things that a competent speaker should have. So D stands for being dynamic when you're up on stage or in front of a group. I stands for being inspiring, which means telling stories that help you connect or help you share your data. V stands for being valuable, which is about having a really good structure. And then finally, A is about being authentic, which is being yourself. Because if we are ourselves, then no one can topple us. We've got a really sturdy platform to stand on, and we know that we're in solid ground. I'm also a speaker, a trainer. I work in particular with people with a tech or data background. But I'm also an introvert as well. Here's a few pictures of me. This is me speaking, and I'm also a singer. I've got a Diana Ross tribute, and I wear a curly wig, and that's me singing at the Savoy. Oops, don't tell anyone you saw that. Now, who was I? I'm sure we've all got our stories to tell of nightmare scenarios at work, but I've got a couple, and I'm going to share them briefly with you today. Now, my first corporate job, I was working in IT consulting, and I was working in the States. And my nightmare moment was when I heard via a colleague that the head of HR had been talking about me. Now, what had he said? "What is wrong with Shola? She's afraid of her own shadow. She wouldn't say bull to a goose. What is wrong with her?" Can you imagine how embarrassing that was to hear from a colleague that that's what was said about you? Now, there's typically no smoke without fire, and a couple of weeks later, I was called into the managing director's office. They felt that I hadn't been pulling my weight in the job. They felt that because I hadn't been speaking up enough, that I was either being lazy or just wasn't up to it. But I was an introvert, and introverts typically struggle to speak up spontaneously in meetings. So I thought, okay, maybe they're going to find me a mentor, or maybe they're going to perhaps put me on a course. But instead, they put me on probation. I had a few weeks to turn things around, and if I wasn't able to do that, then I was out of the job. And that meant also, because my visa was attached to that particular situation, I'd also be out of the country. So no pressure. Luckily for me, one of my colleagues volunteered to come in and support me a little bit in the mornings, and I ended up staying in that job for another 4 or so years. But any of you here sometimes have problems with speaking up at work? Okay, quite a few of you do, yes. I thought my problems were over, but when I came back to the UK, I was now working for a company in a more senior role. This was around the time of the Twin Towers. So tragically, when that happened, as we know, the airline industry started to bomb for a while. One of our big clients, I can't tell you the name, but their initials were BA. They decided to cut a lot of work from my company. So our company was now looking to cut headcount. And of course, whose was the first head to get cut off? It was mine. And again, it was because, Shola, you're not speaking up enough in meetings. So as you can imagine, that was quite a difficult time for me. Here's a picture of a P45. I don't want to see one of those again. It's a difficult time, but I realized then that I really had to take control. And for me, the turnaround came from obviously taking training. It came from personal development. And importantly, it came from being authentic and realizing that I'm enough as I am. I've just got to add a few skills to that, but there's no reason to change or to be a different person in order to be more, to speak up more at work. So what I want to do today is, as I said, experiment to your heart's content. So this is going to be an interactive session. And I'm going to share with you a couple of really handy little frameworks you can use when you're in meetings, when you're at work, that will help you to collect your ideas when you're speaking up. The first one is about getting your point across, and it's called, if the clicker works, it's called the PEEP framework. PEEP, so P-E-E-E-P. Okay. Now, how does this work? So P stands for the point that you're trying to make, and each of the E's stands for an example or a story or some data to back that point up. And then finally, once you've finished with your point, your 3 examples or 3 bits of info to back it up, then you end by reiterating or restating your point. Now, it seems like a very simple little framework, but there are some really good reasons why it's so effective. And the first one is it stops you from waffling, right? Anyone ever started speaking and didn't quite know where they were going with it? I'm certainly like that sometimes. So if you know from the get-go where you are going before you even start speaking, it's incredibly powerful. Now, secondly, there's always those colleagues that interrupt you, right? You start speaking and someone cuts in before you've even had a chance to get your point across. With this framework, if you start by making your point and then saying, there are 3 reasons why, or let me give you 3 examples, what that does is it shuts up those people who are ready to interrupt, because they realize, oh, okay, she knows where she's going, she's got 3 examples to share, let me just wait and let her share those 3 examples before I carry on. It also shows that you're organized. So if someone comes to you and says, well, I think this for 3 reasons, you're going to be impressed, right? They're organized, they know what they're doing. So that's why this framework is great. If you say, I've got 3 reasons why. Now, the reason why it's 3 is because there's something very powerful in language called the rule of 3, or the power of 3. And that's why we have expressions like faith, hope, and charity, or blood, sweat, and tears. They come in 3s. So 3 is particularly powerful. So what we're going to do now is in pairs, and I'm going to get you into working an A and a B. The A is the person with the shorter hair of the 2 of you. So in pairs, the A is going to speak and the B is going to listen. A's, this is what you are going to answer. You are going to share the thing that you're most passionate about, either in your life or in your job, whichever you've got more evidence for, right? You're going to share the thing that you're most passionate about, and then you're going to give 3 examples or 3 reasons why, and then you're going to sum up by restating that thing you're passionate about. B's, I want you to listen out for a couple of things. First of all, did they say there are 3 reasons why? Because that's really important. And then also, did they restate that thing they're passionate about at the end? Okay? So we've literally got about 60 seconds for this exercise. Does everybody know what they've got to do? Yes? A's, you're the one with the shorter hair, remember? So A's, you begin with your partner, and B's, listen up. And I'm going to ring a bell when 60 seconds is up. Fantastic. How did that feel using that framework? Who enjoyed using it? Yeah, quite a few hands going up. If you'd like to practice more of that today, I'll be at Speaker's Corner, which is on the exhibition floor. And you can actually come up and step on the little platform, and you can speak to your heart's content and get some practice. So come join me at Speaker's Corner later on today. But now I'm going to share with you a second framework. And this one is for storytelling. How many of you feel you're good storytellers? Okay, some hands shot up. Great. Now, others of us feel that we tell a story, and at the end, people are like, well, what happened here? Or there are loose ends, right? It can be quite tough to tell a story, especially under pressure. But stories are incredibly important. Obviously, you've got to tell a data story, but the so-called father of public speaking, Aristotle, said that we need three things to be effective speakers. We need, first of all, ethos, which is our credibility as a speaker. You're all credible. You're all in a job where you're dealing with data. You've been hired for a reason. There's your logos, which is your logic, how you put your arguments together. But finally, there's pathos, which is emotion. Are you appealing to people's hearts in some way? Or maybe if it's there, it might be the bottom line in terms of work, right? But is there some story that will awaken the human being in us? So that's why storytelling is so important. Now, when I shared my story with you today, I used a particular framework which is called the now, then, how framework. And it's sometimes called the DIP. There's a speaker in the States called Lisa Nichols who calls it the DIP. And this is a fantastic little framework for storytelling because it really keeps us to the point. Now, we start with what's going on now. And typically, this is a story for telling stories of success. This is a framework for stories of success. So we start with where we are now, what's going well. And then we transition to, but it wasn't always like that. Or, but if you'd seen us 6 months ago, or if you'd seen us a year ago. Then you share what the problems were, the challenges. And then finally, you share how you turned that around, how you came out of those challenges. Now, there are two payoffs in this framework. The first is the payoff of people kind of liking to hear bad news, right? So if you start with, oh, everything's great, people are like, oh, this is boring. Everything's great, but it wasn't always that way. There's a lean-in moment, isn't there? Like, oh, really? It wasn't? So that's the first payoff for the audience. The second payoff is the how, because you're sharing your top tips for how you turned around a difficult situation. And this framework can be modified to talk about bad news. It can also be modified for you to be making recommendations in the workplace. But for now, we'll use it in this format. So the next exercise, again, you've got 60 seconds for this, is B's this time. I want you to use this DIP framework to share a time when you overcame an obstacle or a challenge. And before you go for this, I want you to listen out for the following things. Did they start with current success? Because people often get confused and they start in the past. But this framework is not as effective if you don't start with current success, okay? Because it's that gap between the success and the challenges of the past that creates the intrigue and the interest in this framework. So A's, listen out. Did they start with success? And then listen out for, did they share how they got out of that challenge? Make sense? Yeah. So B's, off you go. You have 60 seconds, so very brief. B's, how was that framework for you? Put your hands up if you enjoyed using it. Yeah, so most of you, fantastic. So this is another one that you can use, whether you're down the pub telling a story about what happened to you last weekend, or whether you're in a work situation, because it's great for talking about overcoming client challenges, and it's also really good for job interviews where you're talking about your competencies. So finally, what are your next steps? A lot of you put your hands up when you said you weren't really that comfortable with doing public speaking or you didn't like it. But I want to leave you with this, which is the sentiment that the best way to predict your future is to create it. So whether you decide that you're going to start to use speaking frameworks a lot more when you're at work, or whether you decide that it's time for you to be more persuasive and be that person who is making those decisions and telling the board or telling those stakeholders that this is how things should be with competent speaking, doing it in a very effective way. It's time for you to take hold of your career, because I know that Rachel told me also that public speaking is now mandatory for data professionals. So don't let it end here. So that's it from me today. I wish you a really fantastic conference day, and I'd love to see some of you come and speak, come and use these frameworks at Speaker's Corner. So perhaps during the drink session, grab a couple of glasses of wine, come and do the best that you can up on the stage, and I'd love to see you. Thank you so much.